What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Hybrid Network and yet another DC Extended Universe topic video. You know, we've been talking a lot about the DC Extended Universe, it's the title of the video series, and we've just kind of been going over what we think should be included into it, what direction it's going in, how we feel about that direction, and what could be happening in the future. But I kind of want to move away from that for a second and talk about the DC animated side, specifically 5 comic book storylines from DC that I think should be adapted. And I know that the whole top 5 thing there's a lot of opinions surrounding top 5 videos and just their merit and their overall place, but I think that this topic in general is enough to kind of create some really cool conversation with you, the audience, in terms of what we think are storylines that deserve to be adapted for the animated movies. Because DC animation is in a weird spot where I think they had kind of married themselves to the New 52, and with stuff like The Killing Joke and Return of the Caped Crusaders coming out, I think that there's a bit more freedom in terms of doing things that aren't so married to that continuity, and that we can actually go back and just do any story we want now. So without further ado, let's jump in with Nightfall. Nightfall is, for a lot of reasons, one of my favorite Batman stories. Again, one of the top reasons being that this introduced Bane, which is my favorite Batman villain of all time. Seriously, Bane is just an amazing villain, and it's amazing to think that this was a character that came in the 1990s when comics were kind of losing their footing and they were going through a really tough time, we'll say that. And there's just so many cool things in Nightfall that I think could really lend themselves to an animated movie. Just the idea of Bruce having to work himself back up to being Batman, Bane, a villain, overthrowing him for the first time and just kind of crippling him. And then we have Azrael coming in and just making a complete mess of the whole Batman title and just mantle. I think that it's a story that has a lot of potential to really create a very compelling movie. Will they have to change some stuff? I'm sure. They might make it to where Bane and Batman have already met before, just considering everyone knows who Bane is. But I think the core story is fine enough that you can change stuff, but the overall tale of Batman just coming to his lowest point and having to build himself back up is a really cool idea for a movie. Number 4, No Man's Land. If you guys have been listening to the last Super Friends, you'll remember that Tim mentioned No Man's Land as being perfect for an animated movie. And I actually thought about it on a while and I thought, yeah, actually it would be. So this one's for you, Tim. No Man's Land as a story involves all of Gotham City just being separated from the rest of the DC universe, and in the process, a lot of the villains start taking their own territories and they slowly start making Gotham into this sort of anarchic state. Now, again, this was another thing that was sort of adapted into Dark Knight Rises, with Gotham kind of being separated from the world, but it doesn't really capture a lot of the elements that make No Man's Land so interesting, such as the Poison Ivy stuff taking over Robinson's Park. Then you have Cassandra Cain becoming Batgirl, Two-Face and Gordon's uneasy alliance, Lex Luthor's attempted reconstruction of some parts of Gotham City. There's just a lot of things going on in No Man's Land. If it were to have its own movie, we could just create something that has all of these elements that made that story so interesting and so unique. We can actually see the villains kind of creating their own Gotham while Batman's struggling to keep order and stability in place. It would be a neat idea, and I mean, honestly, at this point, I'm very surprised that it hasn't been done in some form of animation. I know, again, Dark Knight Rises attempted it, then we also had Arkham City, which had a lot of elements of it, but I mean, there's nothing that's been just the core story of No Man's Land, and I think it really should get an animated treatment. Number 3, Blackest Night. This one really surprises me, because this was like one of the biggest DC events back in like 2009. I still can't believe this didn't get adapted into something at least. For those of you that don't know, all 2 of you, this basically follows the story of the Blackest Night, which is this big prophecy concerning the emotional spectrum within the Green Lantern universe. Essentially, it's the rise of the Black Lantern Corps and sort of the beginning of the rising of the dead of a lot of the DC universe, and all of the other heroes having to battle with the people that have passed and just kind of dealing with their own troubled past as well. Blackest Night would probably serve as one of the darkest animated movies, I think, from DC, just because it brings back all of the emotional baggage from years of DC continuity and brings it into the light. Now, it might have to be changed a little bit because, you know, not everyone knows about all this continuity, but you could easily do a refresher on some stuff near the beginning to kind of ease audiences into it. But I mean, not only that, this would be another Green Lantern animated movie, which we haven't had in a while. Like, I think the last one was maybe Emerald Knights. I can't exactly remember. It's just been that long since Green Lanterns had something to do with animation. So it would be cool to bring him back and make him the star of like this huge DC universe spanning event. Number 2, Superman Red Sun. If you guys were also listening to Super Friends, you'll know that CJ said something about Superman Red Sun being an animated movie, and I couldn't agree with him more. In all honesty, Superman Red Sun is probably one of the best Superman stories ever told. I'm not kidding about that. If you haven't read it, seriously go read it right now. But with that out of the way, what is it about? It's basically the story of Superman if he had landed in communist Russia instead and was raised on their values. What happens next is basically seeing Superman grow up under the communist idealism and kind of growing to make himself the leader of communist Russia, making some really questionable choices along the way and making some very harrowing decisions as well. Not to mention the twist ending. I'm not gonna spoil it. Go read Superman Red Sun if you haven't, and then come back and you'll understand this needs to be a movie, at least an animated one. And last but not least, Crisis on Infinite Earths. For those of you that don't know, well, I don't know how you wouldn't, but those of you that don't know, Crisis on Infinite Earths was essentially a huge event that solved the big multiverse problem that DC had back in 1980. The history of just the entire main continuity, as well as the muddling events of alternate histories, just created this really disorganized sense of what was meant to be known in sort of DC continuity. What was important and what wasn't. Just there wasn't a clear line between the two anymore. In that sense, the decision to kind of erase the multiverse was made, and Crisis on Infinite Earths was the big thing that made that happen. Now, you might think that this is a story that only lives to tell a purpose, but in all honesty, Crisis on Infinite Earths just works as a story on its own. It's a huge multi-spanning event that involves everyone from multiple universes coming together to defeat the Anti-Monitor. Like, DC's biggest, greatest villain was introduced in this storyline, and I don't think they've ever had a villain that even has come close to just how powerful this guy was and just how much of a threat he was to the entire DC multiverse. But it's not only that, Crisis on Infinite Earths just proves to be a huge story that just finds itself integral to the entirety of DC continuity moving forward. There's been multiple crises coming after it. Convergence had sort of a retcon of the original Crisis. It's been mentioned several times throughout the entire course of DC continuity today. It's just a huge important part of DC's history, and the fact that it's not animated just seems weird how it hasn't been animated. Actually, perhaps it's just too difficult to really animate it. There's a lot of stuff going on, and like I said, it incorporates a huge amount of DC history into it, so much so that the audience might be lost if they don't know everything. But if you want my honest opinion, Crisis on Infinite Earths is just one of those stories that I really would love to see animated in some fashion, whether it be in some sort of TV show like Justice League Action, or maybe even in the CW verse. But those are just my thoughts. What's really important is what you guys think. Let me know in the comments down below which DC storylines you think should be animated, or if you agree or disagree with the list that I've presented. I'm really interested to see what you guys come up with for animated features. Thanks for listening, guys, and go ahead and subscribe to the Hybrid Network for more of our original content, podcasts, comic reviews, audio commentaries, super sciences, character bios, and many more. Thanks, and we'll see you guys next time on the next DC Extended Universe topic video. Peace!